Sometimes it's not just one thing that leads to tragedy. Maybe it was the silence in the cool water. Maybe it was the choice to cross a forbidden boundary. Or maybe the orca had already sensed the intruder long before Mark Jensen slipped into the tank. He came seeking connection or escape or something beyond ordinary life. But beneath the surface of the dark water, a massive shadow waited, silent, powerful, and unpredictable. In moments, that quiet presence became a violent force. This is the haunting story of Mark Jensen and his final night alone with one of the ocean's most magnificent yet dangerous creatures. 20 years ago, a man vanished inside one of the world's most famous marine parks, entering a place no visitor should. What happened that night remains shrouded in mystery. An encounter between human curiosity and raw, untamed nature. Join us as we uncover the chilling story of Mark Jensen and Kaito, the orca whose silent power turned deadly. Stay with us to learn what this tragedy reveals about the limits of control and the dangers of captivity. Imagine for a moment the endless, icy vastness of the ocean. The deep, silent realm where some of the planet's most formidable predators have evolved over countless millennia. These creatures rule a world so immense and mysterious, it defies human comprehension. Now, picture taking a fragment of that untamed wilderness, a raw force of nature shaped by endless horizons and fierce freedom, and confining it within the rigid, unforgiving walls of a concrete tank. It's a marvel of human engineering, a triumph of technology and ambition, yet at the same time, it is a living paradox. A majestic being torn away from its wild home and forced into an artificial existence. This is a story of power trapped, of boundaries crossed, not just physical barriers, but the invisible lines where human curiosity collides with primal instinct in ways no one could have predicted. This haunting tale unfolds in one of the world's most renowned marine parks, a place designed to showcase nature's wonders, but shadowed by deeper, darker truths. It is the story of a desperate man's midnight plunge into a forbidden domain, a solitary journey into the depths of a giant orca's watery kingdom. The creature at the heart of this story was not just any whale, but a colossal force of nature known as Kato. His presence was both awe-inspiring and unsettling, embodying the raw, untamed power of the ocean itself. What happened in those lonely hours beneath the cold, unforgiving water was witnessed by no one but the stars, yet it remains a chilling reminder of how fragile the line is between wonder and horror. Before the headlines exploded, before the world knew the tragic name, there was only one man, Mark Jensen. 27 years old, restless, wandering, and searching for something beyond the ordinary. Mark's life was a patchwork of brief jobs and restless nights, a journey without a clear destination. Born and raised in South Carolina, he had always been something of an enigma to those around him. Quiet, introspective, often lost in thought, yet driven by an almost childlike fascination with the world beyond his reach. Friends remembered him as a dreamer, someone whose mind was often far away from the routine grind of everyday life. He talked about the open road, the search for something greater, something meaningful that remained just out of reach. His path was unpredictable, leading him to places where the usual rules didn't apply, where the ordinary faded and the extraordinary, or even the unsettling, might reveal itself. In early July of 1999, Mark found himself in Orlando, Florida, a city synonymous with fantasy and carefully constructed illusions, designed to whisk millions away from reality. It was a fitting yet tragic backdrop for a man adrift in his own life. The day before the tragedy, witnesses noticed Mark at SeaWorld, a solitary figure among crowds of families and laughter. His behavior was described as odd, almost frantic, his eyes fixed intensely on the enormous, graceful creatures slicing through the water. Was it innocent wonder or something darker? A growing obsession? A desperate need to connect with a force far beyond human reach? Mark wasn't a scientist, nor a trainer, nor did he have any professional ties to marine life. He was simply a man inexplicably drawn to the orcas. Their power, their beauty, their terrifying mystery. What compelled Mark to slip past security under the cover of darkness, to climb fences and cross into forbidden territory, remains a haunting question. Was it a misguided attempt at communion? A silent cry for meaning or escape? Or was it the final act of a troubled mind, seeking solace in the shadowy depths of a concrete prison meant to hold one of the ocean's most majestic hunters? The walls that confined Kato were designed to contain and display, but they became the grim stage for a tragedy that would ripple far beyond that summer night. Kaito was no ordinary orca, he was a legend. His name, meaning ocean wave in a local indigenous tongue, stood in stark contrast to the loneliness and sorrow etched deep into his captive life. Towering over 22 feet long and weighing more than 6 tons, Kaito was a living submarine of muscle and raw power. His dorsal fin, permanently collapsed and bent, was a scar etched by years in confinement, a visible sign of a life far removed from the boundless ocean where his ancestors once roamed free. Captured as a young calf off the coast of Iceland in 1983, Kaito was torn away from the intricate social bonds of his pod and thrust into a world of concrete and steel. His early years were spent at a controversial facility in British Columbia, Canada, known for its troubled history with orcas. There, Kaito was involved in a tragic incident in 1991 when a young trainer lost her life during a show. Officially ruled an accident, eyewitnesses painted a grimmer picture, a confused, perhaps panicked orca dragging the trainer underwater in what some described as a deadly game turned fatal. Declared too dangerous, Kaito was sold to SeaWorld Orlando in 1992, intended to boost breeding programs with his impressive genetics. But he carried with him a legacy of unpredictability and a history of violence that would haunt his new home. Trainers at SeaWorld often described Kaito as volatile, prone to sudden mood swings, fueled by frustration and confinement. Orcas are highly intelligent, deeply social animals, accustomed to vast ocean territories, intricate hunting strategies, and complex family structures. Confined to a concrete tank, no matter how large, their instincts can twist and warp into dangerous behaviors. Kaito became a living warning about what happens when nature's fiercest predators are stripped of their freedom. His story was whispered among trainers and activists alike, a dark prophecy of tragedy, long before Mark Jensen ever entered the picture. Long before Mark Jensen's fateful night, long before the name Kaito became etched into global consciousness as a symbol of tragedy, the stage was quietly set within the sprawling empire of SeaWorld, a titan of the marine park world. To the public, SeaWorld dazzled with its polished image of wholesome family entertainment, spectacular shows that brought the majesty of the ocean within reach of millions. Yet beneath the glimmering surface of excitement and applause, an almost imperceptible tension simmered, especially surrounding their largest and most unpredictable resident. Kaito was unlike any other orca. Massive not only in size, but volatile in temperament, a complex creature whose presence demanded respect and caution. Veteran trainers, those who dedicated their lives to these majestic beings, knew well the risks inherent in working with Kaito. After the tragic death of a young trainer years before at a different facility, SeaWorld tightened its protocols with him, limiting physical contact during performances and often keeping him isolated from the trainers in the water. His shows were carefully choreographed to minimize danger, yet these measures were merely a fragile veneer over deeper, unresolved issues. Kaito, brilliant and powerful, was confined far from the complex social bonds that orcas rely on. Stripped of the vast oceans and pod dynamics that shaped his instincts, this isolation bred frustration and unease, turning him into a ticking time bomb of suppressed nature and latent rage. Incidents that could not be publicly acknowledged began to surface behind closed doors, minor at first, then increasingly ominous. A sudden lunge at a trainer, precariously perched on the deck, an unnerving splash drenched a staff member far more forcefully than playfulness would justify, and those piercing eyes that sometimes glinted with a cold, predatory intensity, chilling those who met his gaze. These were not mere accidents or playful mishaps. They were warning signs, subtle tremors rippling through the water's surface, glimpses of the storm beneath. Internal reports, buried in confidential archives, chronicled these moments of tension, the whispered concerns among trainers, and the growing anxiety within the care team. But despite the warning signs, the show went on, the crowd oblivious to the silent, dangerous dance unfolding behind the scenes. On July 5, 1999, Orlando baked under the relentless summer sun, the concrete radiating heat as the park buzzed with life. Mark Jensen spent the day at SeaWorld, an almost ghost-like figure drawn inexplicably to the aquatic amphitheater. His intense gaze fixed on the performing orcas, his slightly disheveled appearance barely noticed among the throngs of visitors. As night fell and families departed, their laughter fading into the humid twilight, Mark remained. His departure was delayed, his presence growing more purposeful, waiting, hiding. How he breached security remains a mystery, whether lurking in a hidden corner or scaling towering fences under the cloak of darkness. Cameras offered no conclusive evidence, leaving only speculation. In the quiet, humming heart of the park, Mark moved with intention toward Shamu Stadium, the iconic home of the orcas and their concrete enclosures. The air was thick with the sharp scent of salt and chlorine, muffled city noises softened by trees and distance. There, he stood overlooking the vast, dark pools, the water reflecting the night sky. Shedding his clothes, whether as a ritual or for freedom of movement, Mark slipped into the chilly water. The cold bite unlike a warm public pool, but the icy embrace of a habitat meant to mimic the orca's natural environment. The exact moment of entry lost to time, but the stillness that followed was profound, broken only by gentle water sounds and the rapid beat of his own heart. Then came the presence, the massive shadow emerging from the depths. Kaito. What happened next is shrouded in terrifying uncertainty, a grim puzzle pieced together from autopsy details and a chilling history of captive orca aggression. Did Kaito regard Mark with curiosity, circling the strange intruder with tentative inspection? Or did the orca, confined and burdened by years of captivity, immediately view him as something to dominate or play with in the only language he knew? Immense, overwhelming, and fatal power? Mark's injuries tell a harrowing story: bruises, deep cuts, and severe wounds across his head, torso, and limbs. These were not accidental or the marks of a simple drowning. They were the scars of a violent, sustained encounter. Most disturbing of all was the report that his genitals were missing, a grim testament to the nature of Kaito's deadly engagement. This was no random attack. It was a chilling assertion of dominance, a deadly game of cat and mouse played out in cold water. Imagine the unimaginable terror Mark Jensen must have felt in those final desperate moments. The biting chill of the water stealing warmth from his body, the suffocating darkness closing in around him, and the overwhelming force of a creature far beyond his control pressing in with relentless power. Every breath was a struggle. Every second, a fight against crushing pressure and icy cold. The painful realization dawning that his mistake was fatal and irreversible. Alone in that vast frigid tank, facing a beast whose instincts, twisted and magnified by decades of captivity, had turned deadly. Mark's screams went unheard, muffled by water and thick concrete walls. His frantic thrashing visible only to the silent stars overhead, until finally, there was nothing but profound, haunting silence. As dawn broke on July 6, 1999, a soft gray light spilled over Orlando, casting a quiet pall over the sprawling SeaWorld complex. Staff began their morning routines with practiced efficiency, preparing for another day filled with eager visitors. But that morning, routine shattered abruptly. A sharp gasp, followed by urgent shouts and trembling hands dialing emergency services. "There's been an incident in the orca habitat," the voice trembled. "Bardaman. He's unresponsive. He's dead. Please, send help immediately." Within minutes, sirens pierced the early light, converging on SeaWorld's entrance with flashing red and blue lights that cast eerie glows against pristine white concrete. Officers, trained for all manner of emergencies, were suddenly thrust into a scene unlike any they had ever faced. A lifeless body floating in a colossal tank alongside one of the planet's most powerful and dangerous animals. Emergency medics arrived swiftly, but their role was grim and resigned. There was nothing left to save. The focus shifted immediately to the complex, delicate task of recovery. How does one safely retrieve a human body from a 12,000-pounder orca's domain after a fatal encounter? Senior trainers and animal care specialists, faces taut with tension, carefully maneuvered Kaito into an adjacent holding pool. under the watchful eyes of flashing lights and anxious officials. Detectives began their painstaking investigation, interviewing traumatized staff who had stumbled upon the harrowing scene, voices shaking as they recounted the chilling details. The pool was cold and still, the surface marked only by faint ripples, evidence of violent struggle, but no human witnesses had seen what transpired. Piecing together that dark night would rely heavily on forensic evidence, medical findings, and the orca's grim history. Public speculation was swift and relentless, a reckless trespasser, a tragic break-in. Yet beneath the sensational headlines lay a darker truth. The undeniable role of Kaito, the magnificent but terrifying orca whose instincts and frustration culminated in a deadly act. The story broke quietly at first, then erupted into a media frenzy. A man found dead in an orca tank at SeaWorld Orlando, a shocking and morbid spectacle that captured public attention worldwide. But the grim forensic details that followed revealed a nightmare far worse than most imagined. The autopsy confirmed drowning and hypothermia as causes of death. The orca tank's water, meticulously chilled to between 50 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit to mimic natural conditions, had sapped Mark's body heat rapidly, hastening his collapse. Yet hypothermia was only part of the story. The medical examiner's report detailed a horrific catalog of injuries: multiple abrasions, deep bruises, severe lacerations across his head, torso, and limbs. Marks not of a mere fall or accident, but of a violent, sustained attack. Most disturbingly, his genitals were missing, a gruesome and chilling detail that made the nature of Kaito's interaction undeniable. This was no simple encounter. Kaito had engaged with Mark in a deadly game of dominance, testing and asserting power in a merciless and terrifying display. SeaWorld's immediate public statements were carefully crafted, expressing condolences but emphasizing that Mark was an unlawful trespasser who had breached security, subtly deflecting responsibility. The incident was framed as a tragic consequence of reckless human actions, rather than the complex reality of an apex predator pushed beyond natural limits. This narrative, designed to protect SeaWorld's image, portrayed the tragedy as isolated and caused entirely by human error. Yet journalists and advocates pressed for deeper answers, probing the unsettling questions beneath the surface. How much of this calamity was born from the animal's captivity, frustration, and confinement? And how many warnings had been ignored in the pursuit of spectacle? The story of Mark Jensen and Kaito would become a somber cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the fragile boundaries between human curiosity and the raw, unpredictable power of nature trapped behind concrete walls. The tragedy of Mark Jensen and Kaito reignited a long-standing debate that had quietly simmered beneath the surface for years: the ethics and dangers of keeping orcas in captivity. Animal rights groups, already vocal critics of marine mammal confinement, seized on the incident with renewed urgency and passion. They pointed directly to Kaito's troubled past, including the earlier death of a trainer, arguing forcefully that Mark's horrific fate was no isolated accident, but a foreseeable consequence of confining such immense, intelligent, and wild predators to unnaturally small and sterile environments. This event galvanized activism and awareness, fueling protests outside SeaWorld parks that called for freedom for orcas and a halt to captivity, bearing signs that read, "Orcas belong in the ocean, not tanks." Legally, the case was straightforward on the surface. Mark Jensen was a trespasser who unlawfully entered the park after hours. SeaWorld faced no criminal charges, and public scrutiny centered almost exclusively on Mark's unauthorized actions. Behind closed doors, however, the tragedy undoubtedly triggered urgent internal reviews of security protocols, though details of these changes were never fully disclosed. What was once a sparkling public image of the orca as a joyful, acrobatic marvel began to darken. Kaito, once celebrated as a star attraction and a prized breeding male, became enveloped in a more unsettling mystique. His name came to be associated not only with breathtaking leaps and powerful displays, but also with the chilling silence of a life lost in the dead of night. For Mark's family, the event was a private nightmare, filled with grief compounded by unanswered questions about his final desperate act and the public spectacle that followed. For the wider public, while many accepted SeaWorld's official narrative, they could not easily shake the haunting vision of a lone man submerged in cold, dark water, confronting a creature of immense, untamed power. a being whose beauty was matched by its capacity for destruction. The shadow cast by Kaito grew longer and darker, a reminder that beneath the surface of captivity lies a tension that can never be fully quelled. This story is more than a tragedy. It is a primal lesson about the precarious balance between humanity's hunger for control and the wild's raw, irrepressible force. We erect grand aquariums and expansive marine parks, striving to contain and categorize the ocean's magnificent creatures. Yet some aspects of wildness, ancient, primal powers honed over millions of years, defy complete domestication. They can only be confined within glass and concrete, held at bay until the right or wrong moment sets fate in motion. Mark Jensen's final, inexplicable act was perhaps a yearning for spiritual connection, a desperate escape, or a reckless thrill. Instead, he encountered the harsh reality of a magnificent predator, driven by instincts shaped through eons of evolution, tragically caged behind man-made walls. Kaito, a being of immense intelligence, strength, and social complexity, carried the heavy burden of captivity. His actions that night, viewed by animal behaviorists not as malice, but as a violent, distorted expression of wild nature, frustrated and amplified by confinement. Ultimately, this was a tragedy born from a fatal miscalculation, a trespass into a realm where human ambition collides with nature's untamable essence. And as each sunrise bathes the seemingly tranquil pools of marine parks worldwide, one is left to wonder what silent, ancient instincts stir beneath those waters, waiting for the darkness to reclaim their voice and remind us of the terrifying, untamed power that forever lies beyond our control. Mark Jensen's tragic fate is a solemn reminder that nature's wildness can never be fully contained or controlled. When we try to cage creatures forged by millions of years in the ocean, we risk provoking forces far beyond our understanding. This story urges us to rethink how we interact with wildlife, not as entertainment, but with deep respect and caution. The silent power beneath the surface is not meant for human playgrounds. Each encounter with wild animals demands awareness, humility, and care. As you watch this story, remember the unseen boundaries that must never be crossed. Protecting wildlife means protecting their freedom and honoring their natural lives. Let this tragedy fuel a greater commitment to wildlife conservation and ethical treatment of animals everywhere. Share this story to spread awareness and inspire others to tread lightly in the wild world. Together, we can ensure that these majestic creatures remain free, safe, and respected, not trapped behind concrete walls. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to stay informed about the stories that matter.